I'm hearing a lot about people switching coaches like after Australia, which is a really awkward time to do it,
What do you
right?
make of
Because you
that?
want to
Yeah.
actually be in the. To me, it feels like um, you never look at someone splitting right after Australia and say, "Oh, this is going according to plan." No one makes a choice in the off season to
Right.
only work with someone for 1 month and then switch everything up kind of after the first month of the season. This is not something that is working at that point. Someone wants out. You feel like it should have been addressed in the offseason. It's a tough lesson learned. If you are learning it and making that rash of a decision this early in the season after one slam.
So let's keep going with that, and we can talk about the specific coaching changes in a second. But if we're going to keep with this theme of team sports versus individual sports, right? I mean,
Yep.
Giannis may or may not like his coach, but he doesn't have to worry about breaking the news and saying, I think time for me to fly. What is it? What
Yeah.
is it like? I mean, you went through this a number of times. What is it like as the player who is younger, who traditionally is you hire this person at some level as an authority figure, yet you're the one that's ultimately the employer. What's it like being 21, 22, 23 years old and saying, I think we need to talk. It's not working out. How does that even work?
It's horrible. First off, it's terrible. And I've had to do it at numerous times, and sometimes I wasn't worried about the conversation. Dean Goldfine, who we worked together 15 months. I knew that was going to be a conversation where we were going to have a lifetime of friendship afterwards, no matter what happened. Right? I knew that it was going to stink. I knew that you're breaking someone's heart. You know that they want to be with you. And also as players, like, and I said this in my Hall of Fame speech as I kind of had some space from the game. You realize people are with you, but you don't fully understand leaving a family until you have one, right?
Right.
And so to kind of give months and months of an adult life away from your kids for this goal of some other person winning tennis matches is a crazy thing that I certainly I appreciated while I was playing and always gave it the respect I thought it deserved, all the while without fully understanding what all was in play. So we'll use that as like a base set. The different times have been different things, and I got dumped once too. So, but the hardest conversation, I think, one of the hardest conversations I've ever had in my life was with Tariq Ben Habilis, who basically took me from 17-year-old junior who was 40 in the world, losing first round at Junior US Open, lived up the street. A friend of mine started working with them. He said, "You got in." I decided I was going to switch coaches. Tariq came on, and I was a kid. Had no pro. I wasn't a pro at the time. Had no pro ranking. And from October of 1999, you fast forward, uh, you know, 2001 March in Miami. I'm beating Pete and win two tour events. So we're talking like an 18-month run where you become the number one junior in the world. You turn pro. You win a bunch of stuff, win two junior slams, win a bunch of challengers, get your ranking up, beat Pete Sampras to make the quarterfinals of Miami, and then win two tour events in April on the trot on clay. Right? What a run, right? And then you go through the next 2 years. But once that relationship shifted a little bit from like he's almost like a father figure and I'm a kid to now we're both pros. I'm sixth in the world, lose first round of the French Open, and I'm going, okay, do I need a different voice? And one of the hardest conversations I've ever had was I was in London because an ex-girlfriend of mine was working there. I left after Paris and I was just thinking for a couple of days and I'm like, I have to get back on a train to go have this conversation with Tariq in person in Paris. And so I go back, I get off the train. We meet right outside of the gates at Roland Garros. It's like a week later. I lost first round to Sargisian. And it was horrible. I literally watched myself in real time. I could see myself breaking his heart through his face,
Right.
like, and it was just horrible. And at that point, I didn't know what was going to happen next. It wasn't as if I had calculated, a succession plan. So after that, I called Brad, and he comes over with a bunch of energy, and it was such a great fit. But that was a horrible conversation. Um, you know, making the decision with Brad after a lot of success was a hard conversation. It gets easier, I think, as you become a little bit more of an adult. Maybe not having it be a surprise for someone, like actually learning how to talk about the issues in real
Right.
time to where it doesn't just blow up at some point. That's probably a regret of mine from kind of those early days. Is listen, it's good, it's good, it's good, it's over, as opposed to it's good, it's good, it's good. Maybe we should talk about some things. Let's get it back on the upward trajectory and actually giving that lifeline to the relationship.
Right.
But it's horrible, and it's not something that people in other sports have to deal with. You're in control of your team, your destiny. You're paying someone else to tell you what to do out of your own pocket. It's a weird
Yeah,
dynamic.
no, and you go, managers go to the HR department and they're giving a list of talking points. You're 21 years old and you've got to make this fairly significant decision. You don't have the, you don't have the training in how to let someone down. I'm curious. I mean, let's be clear too. Tariq was your neighbor, but this was a proper player, right? This was a guy who played professional tennis.
Oh,
This
Tariq
wasn't a
was
guy,
was a
hitting balls.
oh
Yeah.
God
So
no,
this
yeah,
is, but
yeah, that's
but I wonder.
that's that yeah, that's really important context. He was
Yeah,
37 in the world
exactly.
in won junior slams, 37 in the world in singles, top low 20s in doubles, and he did that from about 5'8".
Right.
Right, like uber talented. If he was 6'4", he would have been number one in the world with the way that he was able to play.
Okay, but wait,
So
wait, wait.
unbelievable
When
talent,
you're
unbelievable talent, player, coach, the whole
Okay,
thing.
but so let's keep going with that because I think this is really interesting too. So you're a teenager. This guy's been a top 40 player. He knows all. He's played the French
Yeah.
Open, but then eventually, does it happen where then you're in the top 10 and you're thinking to yourself, this guy didn't get to 10. This guy doesn't know the pressure of playing a major quarterfinal. When you start out, it's really impressive to have someone who's been a proper pro. But do you ever get to a point where you're thinking like, this guy's never been in my shoes?
So I want to separate two things. I don't know that I ever thought that specifically about Tariq. Tariq, it was almost like I think he was only guilty of caring too much about me, right? I feel like instead of watching his pupil play a tennis match or his student play a tennis match, he viewed me as like a family member playing a tennis match, right? Like
Right.
to where he was so emotionally invested that it had this whole other set of pressures, right? And I think he was, he would be devastated for days afterwards, if something bad happened, which is a hard thing to do because like you got to kind of get back to work. And so I think he's only guilty of given me all of the pieces I needed to have physically to be a professional tennis player. And then at some point, it was a stress point for me to lose, not for myself, but because I knew it would devastate him. And I'm actually thinking about that on court in real time. So nothing wrong, only the best. Just at a certain point, I had to take that emotional set out of it a little bit. But as you go on, I like the question you asked, and it's something I've kind of talked about the last couple of weeks also in some other conversations. Is all of a sudden when I'm looking for a coach in '06 when I bring on Jimmy or with Jimmy Connors or before I hired my last coach Larry in the offseason in '08, I'm looking at it and I'm going, okay, I can't hire a 28-year-old coach. Like I can't hire someone who has never seen this or done this before. Their tennis IQ might be higher than mine, but it's how I receive the information. Jimmy hadn't been around the tour in 15 years. But to your point, I knew that when I was teeing off first round, Arthur Ashe Stadium, under the lights, US Open, he knew exactly what I was feeling when I walked out there. So you hire a coach for a year for those 5 matches where it's like, I get it. You look up and he's going, come, he feels it. He knows it. He's giving you some advice on when to use the crowd in Ash, when to stay silent. Don't bring him in unless you need it. All of these little bits of advice. And, that's something that you need at that moment. I don't need someone to kind of tell me what I already know. So at a certain point, the audience for feedback becomes a lot smaller the better you
Right.
get.
Did you also? I got to. I got to double back here. Did I mishear? Did you say you got dumped once?
I did by Jimmy.
Got it.
Um,
All right.
yeah, but it was great. I mean, we had an unbelievable run. It was we're friends to this day. It was great, but it was kind of like I was my life existed in New York and the East Coast at that time, and he was on the West Coast, and it was a little more difficult. But Jimmy was the man. I mean, it literally when it kind of passed to where I couldn't really hit a forehand anymore with shoulder issues, he actually taught me how to move, how to actually hit a backhand for the first time in my life, how to return off that side, and so we were able to kind of retrofit a game that was largely imperfect and learn how to come forward. And it was just, it was, you know, some of the fondest memories I have are inside of that 18 months. Also, just kind of, it was just kind of fun because like the the age divide. If you walked into a restaurant and most of the patrons at that moment were over 50, they looked at Jimmy like he was Justin Bieber walking into like a high school.
You're right.
And then if it was a younger crowd, they would look right past him, and it was like
That's
hilarious
pretty
to me
good.
how obvious it was. But it was also fun because he had a not having a hip replacement's not fun, but him having a middle hip was hilarious because every time he tried to walk through security, it was like it's his first laugh all over again.
But
And I was like, we'll see you at the gate.
those are like two SNL skits in one. One of them is like, should we go to Dave and Buster's or should we go to like the early bird special? And you'll see who gets mobbed and who can like have their meal in peace. And then I mean, I do think should we dwell or at least touch on the two the two coaching changes already 6 weeks into the season. I thought it was interesting. We're talking about just Pagula on the women's side and Holger Rune on the men's side. What's interesting to me is these are just two very different players, very different stages of their
Hmm.
career. These are two players who run their careers very differently, but both of them, for whatever reason, in the case of Jess Pagula, this was a long-standing relationship with David Witt, a former pro. In the case of Holger Rune, God knows what's going on in that camp. I said, whatever Denmark's sort of seasonal unemployment figures are, he's responsible for about 20% of the churn in the job market. But I thought it was interesting that you have two very, very different players at different stages of their career, and yet they both reached this conclusion really early in the season that it was time to, it's like the Milwaukee Bucks, that it was time to hear some new voices and shake things up, which just goes to show that there's this is a delicate relationship, isn't it? This player coach, and it may be early February, but if it's not working, you got to do something about it.
Yeah, and especially like, I mean, Runa is the player. He's top 10 in the world. He's working with Becker, and you want that expertise, especially what I just talked about with Jimmy and that voice in the room. But also, it takes away the yes man, kind
Right,
of mentality of that relationship, right? You're not going to tell Becker, "Hey, we'll get out of here. I'll see you in 2 weeks," and he goes, "No, no, 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 no." So, like, you get a
right,
quick read on the way that things are actually going to go down when someone doesn't need you as much, or at least they don't. They know they've forgotten more than you know, which is largely the case. So with Runa, it just feels like it's up in unorganized. And Severin Lufty too. Like we're talking about the focus is going to be on Boris, obviously because the player, but Severin was Roger's guy for
right.
forever. Even if Roger brought in someone like an Edberg or an Anacone, Severin was there day in day out, training weeks all the time. Was able to witness greatness in motion, and he goes right after Australia, and then which Holger lost second round, and then Becker goes a week later. They kind of gave the same talking points as in their exit interview.
Right.
Um, I don't know what he does from here. I don't know who he's interviewing. But also, if you're a great coach right now and you're entertaining this, that has to be factored in, right? The
Yeah.
fact that he's had, three different coaches or four different coaches in 4 or 5 months, it tells you like there's something that's difficult behind the scenes, and maybe we should give him the benefit of the doubt. But optically, uh, on the front side of this, it seems like a bit of a
Yeah.
mess.
Would you like to date John Cougar Mellencamp? The track record kind of speaks for itself. I will tell you one thing. I don't know if you get the ATP, the letter, the emails that go out to the players, but they've started a section of available coaches. So the emails that the players get now essentially have it's like the old it's like Craigslist.
That's smart.
Yeah, it's smart. It's a nice
That's interesting.
service, but the tour seems to be taking a more active role in playing matchmaker. It's a weird. I mean, I just think this whole thing in tennis. It's a weird dynamic where the 20-year-old kid is the employer essentially, but he's also we think about player coach as mentor mentee, and yet in the case of tennis, it's the 20-year-old who's ultimately got the purse strings and got the right to hire and fire.
And it's also just there's so many factors. that go into it, like geography. And listen, you might be great on court and you might not be able to do 200 dinners a year with the person. I mean, you literally, like with Doug Spreen, who is my trainer, my PT, my body guy. When I was traveling, we estimated that we had dinner together 250 times a year for a decade.
Man.
Like you get annoyed by people very quickly, and you could take a night off and it's fine, but you still have to see them all the time. So there are layers to this. It's not like a pro sports team where, Belichick wasn't having dinner with his players 5 nights a week. Like it doesn't work that way.
Right.
That's not what happens. And so the layering, I actually like what you said about the ATP listing coaches, because we were trying to think of them off the top. Like an idea creates another idea, creates another idea. So I actually like that part of it. I think the Runa thing I can't figure out the timing of it.
Well,
Bringing in both at the same time, like it was, it just seems like a mess to
Well,
me.
I'll tell you one thing real quick, and then we can move on. One thing that you used to always hear, sort of like, well, I really like Andy, but it's what you said. I'm married, I have kids, I don't want to miss birthdays, I can only
Yep.
do 12 weeks. What I hear now that goes into a lot of this decision making is, can they get along with other members in the camp? And it is a rare player now that doesn't have an entourage. So you may love the player, but if you're not so keen on the mental coach or the physio, or there's some weird boundary issues. I mean, there's a player on the women's tour in particular where apparently everyone has a really, really rigid role, and the coach is not allowed to talk about the mental side. And I think there's a whole sort of
That's impossible.
but there's a whole like workplace dynamic now where it used to just kind of be logistics, and I don't want to have to. I'll go to us, like Tony Nadal would never go to Indian Wells, and so they bring in friends. I mean, now I think it's gotten a lot more complicated because you really have sort of a workplace environment. I don't want to sit by Dwight Schrute. Like you have a whole workplace environment that goes into the. I like that one. No, but it's like these teams really complicate dynamics, and I think that's something that I hear when people are thinking about coaching jobs. They may love the player, but the whole sort of organizational setup may give them pause. Anyway, just an aside.
You said all of that, and what I took out of it was a visual of Jim putting Dwight Stapler in Jello.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
where
The
that's
take
that
Yeah,
that
take that, Jesse Pagula.
yeah that's
Right,
that's where my head went now. And also, like, at different times you need different things. Like, I didn't need the first 2 years on tour. I needed Tariq at every practice. You're still learning the game. You're still learning how to practice. You're still learning the cadence of off weeks. You're still learning, a million things. I needed a coach there every single day for the first 3 years that we worked together. Whereas when I hired Larry
right,
Stefanke, I didn't need to be babysat. I was going to do my track work. I was going to be at the track at 7:15 every morning. I was going to be there for 3 hours. I was going to have lunch. I was going to get in 2-on-1s in the afternoon. He could come in. Listen, let's get through what I need to work. Let's make sure I understand the concepts. But I needed him more at events, for strategizing, for a lot of stuff like that. I didn't need someone to babysit me to make sure that I was going to show up to practice. Whereas,
right,
10 years earlier, I probably did.
right.
Frankly, I needed to make good decisions. So it does change. It does change over time. And the Runa thing feels, it's just like I say that because it's a very different
Yeah,
situation than, in my view, than the Jess Pagula situation, coming off of an uber successful run with David Witt, being 29, 30 years old. It doesn't feel like the same thing as Runa, where we have kind of repeated
right.
stops and starts as far as this decision goes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's one thing that made it interesting to me. That different players have different motivations, and there isn't one sort of template for, oh, it's time for a coaching change. You couldn't find two more different players in every sense, whether it's parental involvement, whether it's age. Jesse's married. I mean, but they both reached the same conclusion very early in the season, which was interesting to me.